today is St. John Climacus. So very quickly, what I wanted to talk about is St. John Climacus wrote what is called the Scala. The Scala is a ladder, okay? He wrote the ladder of divine ascent, and he wrote it at the direction of an abbot of one of the monasteries. He wrote it in the 7th century. And it is these 30 steps that apply to living a monastic life, okay? Now, the obvious answer is that none of us here are monastics, all right? So who cares about whether or what St. John Climacus says? Because what he said can be applied at some level in our lives. And so I just want us to recognize it is a wonderful book to read. And what it does is it takes us from being people in the world to being people of God. It is the ladder of divine ascent. So in the first 4, he focuses in on those things that we need to do to separate ourselves from the world, to renounce the world, all right? Because again, when we come in and we're here, we're thinking about our job, we're thinking about the next job, we're thinking about the home mortgage, we're thinking about our kids are crying, we're thinking about everything but God. So part of what Lent does for us is it gives us a chance to now renounce the world and to remember why we're here in church. Equally so, it speaks about ipakoi. It speaks about obedience. Obedience to what the church has asked us to do. Prayer, fasting, charity. So obedience to those things. To look at ourselves and say, am I doing what I should be doing as a Christian? 5 through 7 now speak about metania. Because penitence, I can't pronounce that. All right. So it speaks about now beginning to change our mind. As we have renounced the world, now let us change our mind, right? Metania, right? Noema and meta, we all know that whole thing. All right, so let us start to make this change, all right? And this is also the time that we remember that we are not mortal and that we will die and that we prepare ourselves. This is one of the things you will see very common in monasteries is that the monk is always prepared to die. We have died to the world. That's the first step of the ladder. And now this next step is to remember that we will physically die, as did Christ, and we will, through him, be resurrected. And then he moves on to 8 through 17, and he says, now that we are prepared, let us look at the vices that we have. What are those vices? And he goes through the whole laundry list of them, which can include things like gluttony, alcohol, too much TV. So we can bring it to our society today. So those things that take us away from God, whatever those things are, and it could be work. And then it continues on, 18 through 26, is now those ones that are the most significant vices. So you start small, right? You don't start a marathon with a 20-mile marathon. You start small. You run a mile, then you run 2 miles, and then you go from there, okay? And so those 3 are what you hear in the prayer of St. Ephrem that we say in the pre-sanctified liturgy. You hear these 3. Physical and mental laziness, meaning that, this is not a time to be lazy in terms of our spiritual life. That's mental laziness. And it's not good to be lazy physically. Now, the vast majority of us do not suffer from physical laziness. In fact, it's the opposite. It's almost way too much work, all right? And then the most damaging of the sins, which is then pride, vainglory. And this one always gets us into trouble. And in fact, it is the original sin. So it is considered one of the more lethal sins to our spiritual development. And now that we have done that, 27 through 29 says, now it is time to attain peace. Now is the time for prayer. Now is the time to be at one with God. And then the last one should be pretty easy. The last one is to obtain love. and he puts it at the end, he puts it at number 30, is because it is the most difficult for us to obtain. Because we deal with people on a regular basis, and those people are not necessarily always nice to us. So having love is the most difficult of the virtues and cannot be obtained until we purge ourselves of those first 29. And the last closing words of St. John Climacus's ladder is, if you think that you have obtained the last rung, agape, then you have the sin of pride. Go back to the beginning.